Hello, I'm Stephen Wills of Procurement Central, and it's my privilege and my absolute pleasure to be addressing you at the IPSM conference. I had hoped that I would be with you in person in the Ukraine when I first spoke to the organizers about this amazing conference. I was really looking forward, excited to be coming to Kiev and to meeting all the amazing people and to be hearing your stories, your journeys, your challenges, and to discussing that with you. This is what they call the new normal, and this is the way in which we're now working. So let's embrace it. Let's not have too many disappointments about the fact we're not there in person. Let's do our best to engage and to use the medium to the best effect. So my background has always been procurement and supply chain. My company is Procurement Central, and it provides services which are mainly around training, education, and development for companies in-house to improve the performance of their procurement teams. So some of that is a mixture of consultancy and training courses, online, virtual, these days, training courses. So we do that throughout the world, and you find me today located in London, but we have associates all over the world, and through the medium of Zoom and Skype, teams, we present this to companies and around the world. So today I wanted to talk to you at the conference about a particular subject that I think you will find is very topical and very relevant to you today. And that is, the subject is how to avoid contract failure and contractual dispute and find resolution in these uncertain times. Now, we all know the whole world, it's not just your location, it's not just Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, it's everywhere that we're finding the infamous COVID, the coronavirus, which is impacting our lives and of course our businesses. So we have to find a way of dealing with that. And I get asked this question. I get asked, Steve, how do we find a way out of the situation that we found ourselves in? Meaning, how do we manage our way out of a crisis? And of course, that is not really perhaps the question that should be asked. The question that should be asked is, could we have avoided this in the first place? And that is the point I want to discuss with you in our short time together today. Because to deal with the crisis management, disaster recovery, there are reactive ways for doing that, of course, but you're in a hole, and of course it's damage limitation, isn't it? You're doing the best you can to make the best of the circumstances. And of course, what a lot of companies who've been successful and have managed their way through the COVID situation and are fully operational, and I guess one area we could identify and hold up are companies like Amazon and companies, the supermarket companies, who have had robust supply chains in place for many, many years, and of course are, dare I say it, thriving in the current climate. So we know that many companies are suffering. We hear that all the time, certainly across Europe, that many companies are suffering with the impact of COVID. Some of the airlines, of course, going out of business, finding it very difficult to survive. So the point I want to make is, what did we need to do? What should we have done in our procurement, with our procurement hats on, to have avoided and to at least be prepared for this situation. And of course, the place we need to start is in the risk assessment and the risk analysis part of the procurement activity. Now, everything starts in procurement with the definition of requirements and with the market analysis. In fact, it probably even starts earlier with the budget agreement. It certainly doesn't begin with the contract. The contract is further down the process. And the contract, of course, will be pulling through information that was specified in the in our demands, in our business requirements, and that is what will start to shape the contractual agreement with the supplier. So the first thing we need to do is to identify, to have some way of thinking about what is it that is a risk to our business, to our supply chains, and to, in particular, the agreement, the supplier that we're working with. So the first thing is, are all suppliers the same? Question mark. Are they all the same? And of course, Crowdcheck's model, his 4-box model, teaches us, no, they're not. He will segment the model with, our spend categories. He will segment them into 4 and tell us that some are indeed worthy of strategic partnerships. Others are limited to one supplier, which he calls the bottleneck. And the other 2 are around the non-critical and the leveraged items. So firstly, the way in which we deal with our suppliers, the way in which we contract with our suppliers, the way in which we consider the types of risks that we have with our supply chains are going to be different based on that 4-box model. So the first place to start is everything the same? No. And secondly, so if it's not the same, how is it different and how does that shape our thinking? And then the second thing is, what kind of risks will appear in the relationship with the supplier? And to help us there, of course, we can look at our model referred to usually as a PESTLE, PESTLE, used to be the PEST, and it became more sophisticated. And I propose needs to become even more sophisticated again in light of the current situation, to expand on PESTLE and to consider now not only political, economic and social and technological issues and threats that come through on a macro level across the world, but also the times that we have these global crises. This is not, as we're often told, unprecedented. This is not the first time that we've had a global crisis. Yes, of course, COVID is new to us and is a new threat, but we have had many other health scares in the past. Some haven't reached the proportion that this one has, but we've also had other global threats, whether they be to our security or whether they be financial threats. So global sourcing, global supply chains also carry these days with them global threats and global risks. So we should consider using PESTLE, or if you prefer STEEPLE, then you should look at the threats applicable to Crowdcheck's different spend categorizations and think about your planning for those risks. What are the risks? And then the next thing is, what can you do about it? And of course, what you can do about it is think about the severity and the impact of these risks on your business. And I don't think enough has been done to look back in history. We can't, I don't have a crystal ball, none of us do. We can't see the future. and we can't see down the road, but we can look at history and see what history teaches us and try and learn from that and see what it is in historical terms has happened in these global crises. The banks crash, as I've said, global economies, previous health scares. We can look back and see the dates, the years in the past that have had significant impacts on global economies and global supply chains. And we can start to predict going forward when the next one might be. We won't know to the day, to the month, but we will get an idea of the cycles that these crises come in, and we will start to think about them going forward. There were warning signs for this one, and we can certainly see companies who have thrived, who have managed their way through the current situation, who have had well managed and well designed supply chains in place, and how they have coped with the current situation. So what are the risks? Is it the same for everything? And how do we deal with the risks based on severity and impact? And of course, from this information, we can start to pull together an agreement and a contract that wraps around, or wraps in some of these risks, and with an RACI, a RACI, who is it that's responsible and accountable within both parties? Some companies will like to push the risk onto the supplier. The supplier may accept those risks at a cost, just like an insurance policy, and some companies will take that risk on. So that's part of the make or buy decision, part of the in-house or the outsourcing decision process. What risks are you willing to manage yourself? What risks would you put on the supplier and get them to manage at the cost? And of course, if you will, the power and the ownership that the supplier will have, which takes away perhaps some of your ongoing knowledge of the supply chain product and service, and giving that power over to the supplier. Some of the decisions about where the risks lie, you'll think about them. Do you keep them? Does the supplier have them? Who is responsible and accountable? What are they? How do we manage them? What contractual terms do we put into place to wrap around that? What service level agreement do we have? What key performance indicators do we have? Now, working with legal counsel is not waiting until after procurement have done all of the negotiation. Working with legal means getting involved with them right at the start, right at the get-go, when people are thinking about outsourcing or going to the market. Making sure that your legal counsel or your legal outsource provider has the resources, has the heads up of what is coming down the track towards them. So thinking about the process and the timelines for the sourcing, the strategic sourcing, and when legal will need to be involved and what they'll need to do. And the more they know, the earlier they know, just like procurement, the better equipped they'll be to deal with that. So working in partnership with legal is critical to helping you manage and predict and to anticipate some of the risks and some of the challenges that might be coming in the future in an agreement, in a contractual agreement. So we can't anticipate the future. We can't avoid that. What we can do, as I've said, is to make provision through the type of risks that we consider, the type of tools that we might use to look at this, the crowd checks, the Porter's five forces, thinking about who has the power in a similar way to crowd check, and thinking about some of the tools that we've got at our disposal in the contract. Now, of course, one of the major factors to how to survive the when a crisis, when a disaster hits, is how that contract has been managed. So some people will have quite a rudimentary contract management approach, and that's absolutely fine. When we go back to CrowdCheck and his segmentation, that's absolutely fine with some leveraged and non-critical items. In the top right-hand box, in the strategic partnership of CrowdCheck, we might want something a bit more sophisticated to work with. So here we need supplier relationship management, which is much more than just having a set of process and procedures and governance around the contract. It's much more an interactive piece of work which requires judgment, experience and expertise to manage the supplier, to work with them on continuous improvement, to think about and anticipate on both sides the benefits of a long-term partnership, define what it is a partnership is, put in a framework, get different people involved, and not just the vendor manager from your business, but start to think about supplier relationship management as a way to ensure, yes, that the contract is fully effective, but that you have secured a relationship with the supplier that means that when a difficult time comes around, you will have a defined relationship that helps you through, helps you manage through with your expert provider, giving you perhaps some preferential treatment because of the way in which you worked in the past, that you have got this partnership relationship above perhaps people who haven't. It gives you the security of how to manage through the crisis, the way in which you've developed and enhanced the supplier relationship. And of course, not, as I've said, not just you might have got the CEOs involved, the senior directors of the organization, etc. So here we can see that we've got quite a lot of things that good best practice companies can do to avoid the difficulties of a crisis. Yes, we can manage it in damage limitation terms, but that's all we can do if we haven't done the groundwork, if we haven't done preparation, and we haven't thought about this from the get-go when we first defined the requirements. So we have a number of examples. I'm going to be talking during the conference, running a workshop, and I'm going to be giving an example where a contract experienced a difficult period and how we managed our way through that. So I won't share that with you right now, but you can start to see that this is not a last minute panacea. This is not something that you pull out of the toolbox to suddenly cure the problem. You need to be doing this right from the start of the process, when you're thinking about the supplier and the goods and the services that you want to go to market with. You can't wait until a crisis occurs to suddenly try and solve it. You need to have put all of the groundwork in place. So I guess it's probably helpful now if we press pause and take your questions and try to answer some of the questions that you might have about what more you can do. The last thing I'll just say before we do that is my view is that not enough is being done by procurement in the contract sign-off and in the sometimes the deal, we used to call it the deal approval group, the DAG. So not enough is being done from procurement to really stress the risks and the issues that are prevalent in some of the contracts that we put together. Now, that isn't to scare the business, that isn't to necessarily put them off dealing with the supplier, but it is to say, look, we need to have robust avoidance of these risks, and our risk log needs to be, we need to stay on top of it. It is a real living problem. Otherwise, we are going to incur serious costs and time delays. We are going to lose market share, competitive advantage. These are real issues. So I think my parting shot from the presentation is really leadership is the last thing that we need to add to our list of things to do. Strong challenge to the business to stress the risks that we can foresee of certain in certain relationships and certain contracts. And as I say, what we can do to try to manage, what do we need to manage that if situations like this occur? With that, I'll press pause and I'll look forward to answering some of your questions. So thanks for listening. Don't forget, I've got the workshop later in the conference and also questions coming up. So thank you for your time.